Welcome to the Invincible podcast, where over 9 episodes we follow the epic journey of the 1924 New Zealand All Blacks rugby team, forever known as the Invincibles. My name is Owen Eastwood. I'm a performance coach with a deep focus on competitive strategy and team culture. I'm also the author of a book called Belonging, which sets out my coaching philosophy. In each of the 9 episodes, I'm joined by a guest who is also a friend. Together, we work through that particular part of the tour and seek to extract the timeless lessons from the story of the Invincibles. In this episode, I'm joined by my mate, Ian Mitchell. Mitch is the first ever head of psychology at Newcastle United in the English Premier League. Previous to this, he headed up the sports psychology function at the English Football Association and worked with the senior men's team under Gareth Southgate. Back in the day, Mitch was an academic for many years, and before that, a promising footballer who had to retire early due to injury. Mitch is a very proud Welshman. He's from the Valleys, which fits this episode perfectly. Mitch, thank you for joining me, mate. How you doing?
Really good, mate. Pronounced da. All good.
Kia ora. Well, it's a steamy one today, isn't it? It's a hot day.
Absolutely, yeah. It's just, it's not often we wear T-shirts down this way, but it's very sticky at the moment. I've been up north most of the week, so yeah, it's a bit of a change down here. So it's all good though. Sun is shining. Looking forward to the weekend.
And I think one of the lovely things is we've worked together in the past. I've made this point in previous episodes. It's so important to me and a measure of success of the work that I'm involved in that people stay connected. The idea of, getting into these incredible projects and huge amount of energy and effort and emotion in them and then, walking away and not staying connected, to me that's pretty much falls into the bucket of failed projects. So we worked together around the England football team. You came in after Pippa Grange, obviously working with Gareth, had, a huge amount of success there. Now you're head of psychology at Newcastle United. And I think one of the nice things as well is that, I think last season our teams respectively finished 5th and 4th in the Premier League, and we celebrate each other's little. You won the League Cup, which was actually huge for the club. We message each other. We managed to win a few things at the end of the season. Both of us got into the Champions League, and I think that's a sort of a nice, healthy, mature, hopefully insight into high performance as well. It's not all alphas in that sort of adversarial way at all. Like, I want you to do incredibly well, as well as the team I'm working with, and thought people might enjoy that anyway.
It's one thing that I always invest in is, making good relationships with very good people, and you were one of those. I was very fortunate to meet you, and I've started my journey really at the FA, and you certainly opened my eyes to some brilliant work that you've done in the past, and I think I was quite narrow a little bit in terms of my work, and meeting yourself and Pippa were, fantastic for me to step up and really influence some of the areas that can make a big difference. So I'm really grateful for that, and super grateful for still being in touch with you and classing you as a good friend.
Yeah, well, we had a nice lunch in Monmouth recently as well.
We did, yeah.
Yeah, one of the fun things working with you is, and I'd say Pippa as well, is when you've got a team and the coaches understand that we need good individual psychology in terms of our one-on-ones with our players, and our players being personally set up well to deal with the high performance challenge, but also they invest in the environment, the social dynamic, the social psychology, which is probably a bit more where I fit in. And, obviously we're lucky when we work with leaders who understand that you need both of those. You can't go all in on one. You need both. You need our individuals who are set up really, really well with the mental skills to be able to thrive, but also the social environment is very, very healthy, very, very cohesive, full of clarity and positivity and optimism, and, maintaining that.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's really good to recognize that. And, personal qualities are something that we look at, and strengths of individuals. I get that. But, it's very systemic these days. There's a lot of power elsewhere. So you have to work through the system a lot. You have to inform the environment as much as you can because players need to navigate to those resources to cope and thrive. So it's a really important part that we recognise that. There's some really healthy statistics that the environment does determine the behaviours.
Yeah, that's one of the things I love about the Invincibles is that we actually get a beautiful insight into the individual psychology of a number of the players because they kept diaries, and people like George Napier wrote a really incredible autobiography later. So we actually get to understand very clearly how they're thinking and feeling, the performance anxiety, the ups and downs of that over the course of a tour. But also we definitely get to see the culture, the environment play itself out and the impact that the leadership has on that as well. So for me, that's one of the most attractive things about the Invincibles always has been just an absolute, and I hope people who are enjoying the series feel the same, is that it's a really, really interesting case study on how to get the group, the best out of a group of very, very diverse people. So let's start with, as we have with everybody else who's a pet on the series, 2 questions. The first one really is, it is a beautiful day. There's a lot going on around your village. Why are you having a conversation with me about a team that performed 100 years ago?
The personal connection is back to Christ College, Brecon, which is just up the road from me. It's an independent school. It was founded in 1541 by King Henry VIII. 4 players of Wales, or for Wales, in the famous 1905 team that beat the All Blacks went to school there. So first of all, there's that connection. One of those players actually scored the try in 1905, Teddy Morgan. So the reason I'm talking about Christ College Brecon is my grandfather went there. So my grandfather went there actually in 1924. And then almost 100 years to the year that my grandfather went, my son was given a scholarship to attend the school. And I was asked to give a talk to the school the other day, which I did about everyday excellence. It was fantastic. I love doing that. I get so much energy from it. And I spoke about the behaviours around high performance. And afterwards, I sat down with 4 or 5 of the students, the pupils. And I was chatting and this game came up and one of them actually knew about it. I don't know why I sound too surprised about it, but it just hit me. And I thought, wow, this 17-year-old said, did you know that there were old Breconians who played in the 1905 game? And Teddy Morgan scored the try. And I was just blown away by it. And when we were walking around the school, they got a great identity piece. You'd love it. The artifacts that they have there with the change of uniforms, the footwear, the badges, the caps, everything that gives you a real sense of identity. So there's definitely a personal connection through my own family there. The second part of the connection, you mentioned it earlier on, I came from Ebervale, born in Ebervale, which is in Gwent. And this region resonates quite strongly from a Welsh side of things with the 1924 game because 4 players from Gwent played in that game. Albert Stock and Jack Wetter. Albert was the centre. Jack was the fly half and captain from Newport. You had Jack Gore, who's from Blaenau, which is the next sort of valley across to me, and Steve Morris from Crosskeys Rugby. And all of them were Gwent sort of players, and all served in World War One. Jack Wetter actually received Distinguished Conduct Medal for bravery. The key thing for me was all 4 of these came from communities where sport was the lifeblood. That physical and mental toughness was forged daily in the mines and the steelworks. The local clubs are the heart of our belonging. So going back to belonging, or my sense of belonging, there's a real connection here to the men.
You're the perfect man for the job today because we are going to move from the team having played club teams and county teams to now into the test matches. And we're going to cover the Irish test match and then the climactic game, which is against Wales, where was the only game they lost in 1905, as you mentioned, and those old boys of your school who played a prominent role, including scoring the try.
Sure.
So that's what we're going to be doing today. But before that, let's go to that ritual itself. And I can't wait for this, but, your places of belonging.
I do get emotional when I talk about this, but, I was born in 1971 in Ebervale. It was a South Wales Valley, basically. Both parents were teachers. My mum still lives in Ebervale, and I go back to see her as frequently as I can. And I have a sister who's 5 years older than me who lives closely. We live in Crickhowell now, like I said earlier, in South South Wales. So it's just on the edge of the National Brecon Park, which is a beautiful place. I married Michelle 28 years ago. Well, crazy to think about that, but a local girl who's a beautiful wife. And we've got two beautiful children. Livy, who's 22, is working now, and James, who's 15. And like I said, goes to Christ's College Brecon and really enjoying his rugby at the moment. I work currently at Newcastle in the Premier League, really enjoying that. Fortunate enough to work previously in the Premier League when another Welsh side was in the Swansea City many years ago. I was previously head of psychology at the FA for 5 years and worked with the national men's senior team with Gareth and Stephen, the technical team there, which was a fantastic experience. It really was. And where I met myself, fortunately. The place I belong in, back in 1971, South Wales was the heartbeat of the industrial sort of work. Ebervale is a small valley town, small population. And I guess my earliest sense of place was defined by the steelworks and the coal industries throughout the valleys. I mean, prevalent then. My dad was actually born opposite the steelworks. He always used to tell me about waking up every morning and wiping the orange dust off the windows from the steelworks. It's hard to describe the way of life. You know, what I'm describing isn't just geography. It is a way of life. The steelworks in Ebervale around the 60s and 70s nearly employed around 15,000 people. Largest one in Europe. Coal seams, they run like arteries through the valleys. My dad was an art teacher, used to go down and paint and draw the miners. So every time I go to my mum's house, there's pictures of them at there's ceramics around the house. The steelworks and coal mines are shut, but the spirit is definitely enduring. You can feel it there. That sort of ritual of belonging transcended far beyond the boundaries of Ebervale. And that's woven into my fabric of my professional life and skills. And where I've been and what I've done is, in a profound sense, I'm enacting those enduring values, I guess, that were instilled in me by that small valley town. So you can see, you know, the togetherness at Eugene Cross Park, the resilience of the town, the grit on the pitch, the shared purpose, they all echo the belonging that was forged through steel and coal. So I'm really fortunate that it's a ritual that continues to define who I am.
That's so wonderful, Mitch. Beautifully put, mate. And, you know, I was really disturbed a couple of years ago to read this study from the US Sapien Labs Global Mental Health Study, which showed that across 172 countries, I think it was 178 countries, so it's not westernized, that over half the people between 18 and 24 around the planet reported emotional distress. And when they interviewed them, and I think they have over 1 million data points in their methodology, the primary reason that sat below this emotional distress was a loss of social identity and a sense of profound loneliness and isolation and vulnerability. And that scares the hell out of me, that. And that's a part of the motivation for doing this. So now they are moving into the part of the tour which is going to define their legacy, and that is the international test matches, the first one of which is against Ireland at Lansdowne Road. And so Monday, the 27th of October, they get a steamer called the Olive from Carlisle. And the following morning at 6:30, they come up the River Liffey and then dock in Dublin. And they do something quite interesting, I think. It was 100 years ago. They seem to understand recovery pretty well. They seem to be very thoughtful around how you prepare for a very, very big match. They didn't have any games that week. They chose their test team, and they all relocated to the Salt Hill Hotel outside Dublin. And the players spent the whole week there mainly recovering from quite a heavy schedule. And they only had 2 training practices at Palmerston Rugby Club during the course of the week. Those players were told that you are not to go into Dublin this week. So they spent 4 days and 4 nights preparing. The other players who were not involved in the test squad, they were allowed to go into Dublin. And in fact, they stayed there. And you will not be surprised to hear this at all. On the Wednesday of that week preceding the test match, they did a tour of the Guinness Brewery, which I think is something that every subsequent All Black team has done as well. So what the players would do during those 4 days is they had a ritual of breathing, which continued from on board the ship. So when they got together in a training mode, they went back to these breathing techniques. And then they went for a pretty gentle run along the beach before breakfast. And then for the rest of the day, they were allowed to relax, except those 2 days where there was a training session. There were a couple of injuries and illnesses that affected them. One of the players, Ron Stewart, actually was sent to a nursing home. He had what was called pleurisy. He was quite unwell, and he spent 9 days there. So that was a bit of a shock to the team. Most significantly, Cliff Porter, the captain, he had been injured in the preceding game against Cumberland in Carlisle. He'd injured his knee. And now when it got to the test team for Ireland, he was originally named as the captain, as you'd expect, but through the course of the week, it became clear that he was not going to be fit enough. So something pretty dramatic happened, and that was that he had to stand down. And that was not contentious because it was really around his physical capability to play. It just wasn't there. So he was replaced in that position by the other wing forward called Jim Parker, who was quite an incredible player in his own right, a completely different style of player. Very, very athletic and quick. In fact, had been New Zealand 400-metre champion. So like a really, really fast player. So a really good player, but he would not have otherwise have played. So also what happened in the course of this week is on the Wednesday is the British national election. And so all the preceding games that are playing in the UK, it is in the context of a really very contentious. I'd invite anybody to look up the 1924 British general election. It was extremely contentious. The first ever Labour government under Ramsay MacDonald were looking to continue, and they were challenged by the Liberals, but also the Conservatives led by Stanley Baldwin. And there was it was quite a nasty campaign, a lot of allegations, actually some complete falsehoods made around communism and the Labour Party, etc. But ultimately what happened on the election on the Wednesday was Stanley Baldwin, the Conservative government, came back into power. So that Labour government was in for that one term and then out. So that's quite tumultuous thing going on. And then, of course, also Ireland itself is, this is what I think is very important. We're studying a team, but you mentioned the word systemic. You always got to understand the context around the team. And here they arrive in Dublin. Actually, the Easter Rising in 1916 isn't that long ago. Okay, when there was a rebellion seeking an Irish Free State. Then in 1921, a deal was done between the British government and the Irish representatives, which was very, very, very contentious. Michael Collins on one side, Eamon de Oliveira on the other. That led to a civil war. And that civil war had only finished the year before the All Blacks arrived. So this was quite a tortured, broken country in many respects. Part of the landscape was that there would be a Northern Ireland, but even when the All Blacks were there, the Northern Ireland boundary hadn't been confirmed yet. A commission had been set up to work it out. So even that boundary wasn't clear. And actually, the All Blacks had a bit of an uncomfortable experience crossing into Belfast related to that. So these are fascinating times to be an athlete in these countries. And then, unfortunately, in terms of the game against Ireland, the test match itself, was that the weather was absolutely horrendous. And it's quite incredible in this tour. The weather seems to be really, really good or absolutely awful. And unfortunately for this game, because Ireland were a very, very good team, this was an era in the 1920s where the England rugby team under Wavell Wakefield, the Harlequins captain, were preeminent. And they would dominate most of the decade. The latter half of the decade, Scotland came into their own and won their first Grand Slam. But Ireland was competitive with both of those teams. So it should have been really a tremendous match. That was what the anticipation was. As it happened, it was just wet. The ground turned muddy. They didn't even have a half-time. It was 0-0 at half-time, and Ireland had to win and weren't able to score any points. But they didn't even have a half-time. It was so cold. The captain said, can we just crack on with it? And in the second half, the All Blacks did what they needed to do. They didn't play the style they wanted to play. But they scored the only try of the game and won 6-0. The man of the match was Ernie Crawford, the Irish fullback. And George Napier, in his diary later, wrote this about Crawford. After the game, I used often to lie in bed half of the night thinking and memorizing the things that Crawford had done. I said to myself, if another fullback can do this, you can too. And from those reflections, this started in me a feeling that if you make your mind up that you will do a thing and master it, you will bring it off, and nothing is impossible. So actually, it was very interesting because George Napier obviously goes on to become the superstar of the tour, and against Wales, he was the man of the match himself. But he is still very much in learning mode here. And even though the conditions were poor, he has definitely taken something on from that. Dan Carter, who is my partner on this project, he spoke in episode 1 around his great uncle, Bill Daly, the scrum half or halfback, we call them in New Zealand, and he plays in this game and was outstanding. Had a fantastic game. Interestingly, instead of going straight off for the next game, which is against Ulster at Ravenhill in Belfast, the team actually stay in Dublin for a day, remembering that the test players had not been allowed to go into Dublin during the week in preparation for the game, but they are desperate to do that. And of course, a lot of the players actually have Irish ancestors as well. So what the All Blacks do on the Monday is they get some cars, they hire them out, and they go on a proper tour of central Dublin. And for example, they go to the post office, O'Connell Street, where the Easter Uprising, the Easter Rebellion happened. They also went to Trinity College, the Book of Kells, that famous incredible artifact of Celtic history. They went and wanted to go and see that. They went into the churches. They spent the whole day very, very stimulated by it. And, George Napier again said the post office on O'Connell Street and the law courts were still hulks after the bombings of the years before. Every building in the main street was scarred with bullet marks. The players are being very stimulated here. There is a lot going on besides rugby, and I think that actually has a massive effect on why they don't burn out, which we're going to talk about in a bit.
That engagement with the community is directly contributing to collective resilience, right? It does so in so many ways. And the teams, that even you and I have been involved with, we try and promote that as much as possible, even though that there's so many things going on for players these days. You have to afford that time to do that. And we really talk about some high performance behaviors here.
Yeah, I think they're evidence that interacting with the environments you're in and getting stimulation outside your hotel room is completely compatible with high performance. And in fact, I would say promotes. It's something for us to reflect on. But,
sure.
So they go up on the following day up to Belfast. One of the players talks about their luggage was searched in this undefined border between the Republic of Ireland, or the Irish Free State it was called, and Northern Ireland or Ulster. With their revolvers on their hips, they look grim and businesslike, was his comment. So they play against Ulster. And again, crazy. This is a couple of days later after the Irish Test match, and they play Ulster. Beautiful day, and the conditions are absolutely perfect. And not surprisingly, because the All Blacks try and play an up-tempo game with a lot of athletes, they win 28-6. And in that game, Son White, who was spoken about quite a lot on this series, was the man of the match and was outstanding. So the following day, they get the boat back to the UK. They actually go from Belfast to Stranraer in Scotland. They don't play Scotland. That's a topic we'll get into. The Scotland Rugby Union refused their opportunity to play the All Blacks in a test match over some bitterness around gate receipts of the 1905 game, which really does seem very small-minded on probably both sides, but a real tragedy actually, because the following year Scotland won the Five Nations in the Grand Slam, so would have been a really good game. But so they get the train across to Newcastle, and then they play Northumberland at Gosforth, Newcastle, and they win that game comfortably 27-4. And that's on the 8th of November. And actually, we're getting closer now to the 11th of November, which, of course, is Remembrance Day. On the 11th of November, Remembrance Day, I'll just go through a little bit about what their day looked like, just to bring it to life, I suppose, a wee bit. But they actually trained first thing in the morning at the Artillery Company's barracks in London. So they got their training in, because the next day they were going to Cambridge University for a game against a very good team. So they got their training in. Then at 10 o'clock in the morning, they went to St James's Square and they joined the procession all the way to the Cenotaph in Whitehall. And they were actually behind a car of disabled men, which itself was behind the King, the Prince of Wales, the Duke of York, etc. The team marched behind them four abreast. Just even thinking about that is quite powerful to think that they're just quite not far behind disabled men and the King and the Prince of Wales and Duke of York, and they are four abreast. And then they place their own wreath on the cenotaph. At 11 a.m., of course, there's a 2-minute silence, followed by guns in Hyde Park, drum roll, the last post. Then there's a choir singing hymns, the Lord's Prayer, Reveille, and then the national anthem. And then after that, actually, after the formalities, the team then proceeded to Westminster Abbey on their own and passed by the tomb of the unknown soldier. They then watched the change of the Horse Guards at St James's Square, and then, as true Kiwis, they went to Pall Mall and saw the Captain Cook Memorial. So that was a way, I suppose, of connecting with home a little bit on that day, being far away from their families. In the afternoon, they just had a relaxed afternoon in Regent's Park. And then that evening, they were taken out for dinner by the RFU, the Rugby Football Union. And for a couple of the players, they actually got the tube from their hotel, which is the first time they've been on the tube. You're thinking about the tube in 1924.
I've been a bit quieter then.
Yeah.
Maybe.
And they'd stayed at their hotel, I think the Berniers Hotel in London that night. And actually just had a day trip up to Cambridge University. And they left at 10 o'clock from Liverpool Street Station. And there was a 3 p.m. kickoff. Unfortunately, here we go again. It had rained for 16 hours before the game. Real shame. Cambridge University, in those days, Cambridge and Oxford University teams were absolutely outstanding, full of internationals. Mm-hmm. The game was a quagmire, and the All Blacks did what they needed to do, a bit like the Irish Test match, and won the game, of course, but only won it 5 points to 0 and scored 1 try. But this is what I want to talk to you a little bit more about, get your views on this. This is around this idea of burnout. Because my theory a little bit is that, even and with Premier League, which we're both involved in, is a good example. It is a grind. It's a hell of a grind, isn't it? Not only is it a grind over how many months is it? 7 months or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But, it's week in, week out. But they're playing two games a week. You've also got your League Cup. You've got the FA Cup. We're both in the Champions League this year, pre-season. So there's just so much. And, you've got our home bases where they train, but that can get samey as well. So I'm definitely a big advocate of we've got to keep things fresh and bring in novelty and stimulation, not over the top so it's gimmicky, but just very strategically in time. So I think actually with England, you guys did that extremely well. You'd bring in someone from the outside. And I know actually at Newcastle this week, you also had someone interesting to come in into the group this week. So I think those things are really, really important. For the All Blacks, the novelty and stimulation of outside of the game was ever present. And just as an example, when they played Cambridge, and it was only a day trip, so they played at 3 o'clock, game was done by 5, then there was an aftermatch soon after, and then they got the 9 o'clock train back to London. But in this aftermatch, just to give a flavour of one example of the type of experience they were having, in the aftermatch, there were these Cambridge students or recent Cambridge students who came to the aftermatch. I'm talking about people like Harold Abrahams, who that year in July had won 100 metres in the Olympic Games, which Chariots of Fire obviously is a dramatic telling of his story. Lord Burleigh, David Cecil, was also in the 1924 Olympics, 400-metre hurdlist, who would go on and win in Los Angeles in 1928. So he's another guy hanging around. Percy Chapman is the England cricket captain and captain of Cambridge. He's there. Duleep Singh, one of the great all-time English batsmen of Indian background, he's there. George Mallory, who would lead an attempt on Everest and die, he's there. And then also from a New Zealand point of view, pretty importantly, is Sir Ernest Rutherford. So Sir Ernest Rutherford absolutely loved his rugby. He was a Nobel Prize winner, of course. He led the Cavendish laboratory at Cambridge for a significant period of time. And while he was in charge of the laboratory, They identified the neutron in 1932, and they split the atom. So obviously, a massive figure in the world of physics, science generally. 3 of his students won Nobel Prizes. But he absolutely loved his rugby. He went to Nelson College in New Zealand. He was in the first 15. And so he was incredibly enthusiastic. And there's a lovely artifacts where, the manager of the team is, Ernest, here's your tickets to the game. And so, the players are after their game. And remember, the All Blacks also have this ritual, which they stay in the dressing room and review the game in real time. And the non-players come in and lead that conversation. So as the ritual was spoken about previously, they keep doing that. So that would have taken a while. So maybe we're getting towards 6 to 7 o'clock before they actually get into the aftermatch. But then they open and all these incredible people, literally legends of British sport, basically, but we're all at Cambridge at the time. And it's just a very interesting quote so Jock Richardson would step up and be the captain of the team while Cliff Porter was injured and then non-selected. So Jock Richardson was the vice captain of the team when they were first selected, but becomes an on-field captain. And he said this. He said, our team was getting stronger and stronger. We certainly didn't suffer from any of the staleness that affected the 1905 team. I know that I was just as keen at the end as I was at the start. And the journalists picked up on it as well, is that why are they not getting tired? And we're only halfway through the tour at this point, but they were saying the same thing at the very end of it. They seem to be getting better and fitter and stronger as they went, and just as enthusiastic. And, as I said, my theory a little bit is just the way that their mindset around it, the whole experience was a help. But I'd love to hear from you on that whole idea of around burnout and why this team seemingly broke that pattern.
The bit I like is the acknowledgement of mental fatigue as well. That what I would say is mental energy bank, where your bank account where you deposit or you take things out of that from a mental perspective. And, they've been making deposits back in to prevent that mental fatigue, and the implications around that mentally, we know for a fact it will enhance focus, has an impact on your emotional regulation, your decision-making skills, all of that kicks in.
Examples continue around this whole idea of this novelty, this stimulation, adapting to all these different environments they find themselves in, because after the Cambridge University game, they come back to London. They actually play London Counties, which is like a representative team of the best players playing club rugby. Waver Wakefield, England captains the London Counties team, but there's 3 or 4 other England internationals in it, and they get hammered by the All Blacks, 31-6. But what I was going to highlight, again, this idea of anti-burnout, just a flavour of what the All Blacks are doing around this game. Just before the game, they go out for dinner with Colonel Bernard Freyberg, I've mentioned before, the Victoria Cross winner, the Kiwi, who goes on to be one of the biggest generals in the Second World War on the Allies, as an Allied side. He invites them to his residence for dinner in Hyde Park. General Sir Ian Hamilton, who was in charge of the Gallipoli campaign on the British side, is there and gives a speech about Gallipoli. And I can only imagine how Son White in particular would have felt, given that the Otago Mounted Rifles he was in was decimated in a nighttime attack ordered by Hamilton and his staff. Son didn't keep a diary, so we don't know. But what we do know is he never spoke about Gallipoli to his family ever, and they only understood that he fought there after he had died, and it became public. But we can imagine how uncomfortable that must have been for him. But anyway, that is one evening. There's another evening where there's a New Zealander living in London who owns the London Playhouse. So they go to the West End and watch one of the plays as his guest. On Tuesday, they fly from Croydon in 3 aeroplanes across London. Well, that was 1924.
Wow.
So, I mean, you can't get much more novelty or stimulation than that. And then the next day, they visit Parliament and are guests of one of the Lords in the House of Lords. So all of this is across like 3 or 4 days, and again, just gives a flavour of the tour here. We can't replicate all of those today, I appreciate it, but I think there's a ton more things that we can do. And some of the teams I've worked with, we actually, created a ritual where wherever we arrived, we would get someone from that community to come in and just talk to us about this is where you are and this is who we are. And
Absolutely.
but it's very straightforward, but it actually makes the whole experience more meaningful. And for some of them, it might be okay, but I reckon when they get older and reflect back, that would be a real memory. And I just think it's just basic respect as well when you're traveling around and visiting places. But
there's so many things around that, mate. You're absolutely right. What I said about that, I think that's, that collective resilience. And like I say, you would know that what we did previously with some of the teams, it doesn't it just, when a team connects with the community that they're in, they're definitely reminded of that they're playing for something bigger than themselves. That sense of shared purpose acts as a powerful motivator, doesn't it? They feel a deeper responsibility to the people who support them. You become that societal mirror to a certain extent, which I really love that sort of concept. But I also like the way that these guys went about it. There's so much perspective and humility in this group because they witness, like you mentioned Ireland earlier on, they witness the challenges and the passions of people in the local community. And it gives them a broader perspective, doesn't it? It can help them see that a loss or poor performance, while it's significant in the inner circle in the moment, it's not the end of the world. That humility and perspective really prevents a team from being consumed by a single defeat or poor performance. It allows them to bounce back much more effectively and keep them together. So I really like that part of the team. This team, I really like that.
What's interesting about the Invincibles is that they are really, really efficient. So, when they have time off, they have properly time off. It's not like grey area. But when they're on. And that includes after the games, that ritual of staying in the dressing room for that hour and getting the non-players to come in and give their reflections on the game, and then a group discussion comes out of it. And occasionally that's spilled in. If it wasn't resolved, then they would carry it on after dinner. So when they were working, when they had their heads in high performance, they were all in. It was very clear, but they didn't have this all day sitting around having meetings and dragging it all out. They kept it very, very simple. And now we move to the next game, which is quite an important game, and that's against Oxford University. So these are all building up towards getting into Wales, which is this do-or-die test match, which is coming up. And they go to Oxford. And a lot of the All Black players said that was the actually toughest game of the tour, interestingly. Even though they only beat Newport in the last minute, they actually said that this was Oxford were probably the best team they played on the whole tour, including international teams. And just to give an example, Oxford had 13 internationals out of their 15 players, included the centre George Aitken, who was the All Black captain in 1921, and one of a number of Kiwis actually who had a Rhodes Scholarship and studied at Oxford. So he was, the All Black captain in their first ever series against the Springboks in 1921. Now he's studying at Oxford and he plays against the All Blacks, and he has an outstanding game. And it's interesting, actually, in the aftermatch function, Cliff Porter really, really paid a massive tribute to him. It was, which would have been an amazing moment, I think, for George Aitken, but for the whole team. Like, that's your ancestor there, and a lot of the players played with him, and now he's at Oxford. And in fact, he would then, because of the rules were different then, was eligible to play for Scotland and played for Scotland, and was in that first ever team to win the Grand Slam in the following year. So the All Blacks were down early in that game, 14-10 at halftime, the score, but they came back really well and won the game 33-15. But the Oxford team just attacked, basically similar style. So now the following day, that's Thursday the 20th of November, now we're into Friday the 21st of November, and the team get the train across to Cardiff. Now we're all starting. So there's two games now. They're playing Cardiff Club at Cardiff Arms Park on the Saturday, the following day, and then there's a week again where they don't play and they just prepare for the test match against Wales. So against Cardiff, they arrive in City Hall after they get off the train, and the Lord Mayor of Cardiff, you won't be surprised, gives a speech and reminds them of their defeat in Cardiff in 1905. And also a predecessor of the New Zealand team in 1889. He highlights that and tells them quite directly that he hopes Cardiff Arms Park will be their Waterloo again. So all good stuff. The following day, they played Cardiff. Beautiful day, as I'm sure most days in Cardiff are. 40,000 fans. This is not a test match. This is a club team playing the All Blacks. There's 40,000 fans. Incredible singing, as you've been part of many times, no doubt. Amazing atmosphere. The All Blacks won the game 16-8, but it was a very tight game, actually, a very, very difficult game. Yeah, after the game against Cardiff that evening, the management, Stan Dean, and Judge Aitchison, who was with the official party, who's a Maori Land Court judge, and some of the players are invited to the BBC studio in Cardiff. And Stan Dean actually does a short talk on New Zealand. Judge Aitchison gives a short talk on the haka and the origins of it, Te Rapraha, etc. So that's really interesting. And then some of the players, with Major Dancy, who's actually a Kiwi living over there and a supporter, who was a previous New Zealand Maori and officer in the First World War, him and some other players sing 2 songs, Maori songs. And 4 million people in Britain listen to this live. Quite amazing.
It's amazing, that, isn't it?
Incredible opportunity.
It really is.
And just these type of experiences they're having.
Wow. So
on the Monday, the team all visit Cardiff Castle together, and then they split off again. The test players go to Tenby on the train. Yep. And then the rest go straight to Swansea. The Welsh love their rugby, very, very proud of their country. What sits behind a little bit of that national identity and, that meaning of rugby?
Definitely didn't have total ownership of who we are or who we were politically. So I think rugby gave us a new identity, really. It's ingrained in Welsh culture as it is in New Zealand. And you mentioned the 4 test matches. We only lost 1 out of a number, and 1905 was a defining moment for us. The Originals, they were dominating every opponent on the tour of the British Isles at the particular time. Undefeated in, I think it was 27 matches, was it? Yeah, they scored, I'm sure I read this, around 800 points and only conceded 32 before arriving in Cardiff. And I know it was a contentious match and a 3-0 win for Wales, but their first and only loss of the tour. So basically that solidified Wales's reputation as a real top-tier rugby nation, and the first to lower their colours, so to speak. So I think the win transcended sports, becoming a powerful sort of symbol of Welsh and national identity. Like I say, we lacked political representation, and it was a growth of sense of pride. It gave us emotion, a real moment of immense unity, demonstrating that we could stand up to, albeit on equal footing with a dominant colonial team, basically.
That week, George Napier made a really interesting comment, which was that that week in Tenby, quote, we were enveloped in a gathering mist of emotionalism. And partly what he's referring to there is the expectation on the All Blacks when they left was pretty low, because they'd lost that pre-tour game against Auckland and not been impressive in Australia prior to that. But when they left, they met the Governor General, Lord Jellicoe, the Prime Minister, Massey, all of these people, and they gave them a very clear message, and that was, your mission is to beat Wales.
Yeah.
And they fully, completely understood it, and they were explicit about it. And I thought it'd be a good chance for us to have a chat about this a little bit, because in our world, there's this sort of never-ending, maybe slightly circular debate as to whether we should focus on the process or focus on the outcome. My approach to that is pretty simplistic, and that is that I feel like we need to start with what would be an incredible outcome to this thing that we are wanting to do together, and visualize spectacular success, and then lock that in, and then work out a process that will get us there. Richie McCaw, I was fortunate to be in a talk that he gave a few years ago. It was quite a small gathering of people, but he put this beautifully. Well, at least it lines up with how I feel about it, and that is that he thought about winning a World Cup as basically you're in a car and you're about to drive your car, and actually sitting beside you on the passenger seat is this toy trophy of a World Cup. And so before you start driving your car, you hold it, you look at it, it brings a smile to your face. But then what you do is you put it in the glove box, and then you close the glove box, and then you focus on your sat nav as to how to get you from A to B. And then there'll be times on the trip where you got to refuel. So, you know, and that analogy, pull over a service station. And when he would refuel and pull over the service station, he would also open the glove box and just hold it again to give him energy. And I absolutely love that. I'm always promoting that we do that let's have this vision of success, both short-term, medium-term, and long-term, and not go on and on about it and over-focus on it. Develop a process to get us there, but by all means, have visual reminders and language cues around this is what we're going for. You know, the All Blacks were possibly a perfect example. They had a very clear process of how they prepared and played and reviewed games. So they did have an excellent process. They weren't making it up every week as they went along. They stuck to something that was working for them. They had a battle rhythm, is what I would say. But at the same time, they were quite explicit and didn't shy away from, we have to win this game. If we do not win this game, this tour will be a failure. So just as a performance psychologist, which I'm definitely not, I mean, what's your reflection on that whole world of framing?
Yeah, I think I've, you know, in some of the teams I've been in where there's higher expectation, maybe not in the inner circle, but maybe externally, and how you navigate that, you know, yourself, you know, what is said outside the circle and inside the circle can be very different. And so we don't want people to be giddy. We want people to be contained, because we know that in the present state, then we have higher possibility of executing the game plan for sure. So the sort of philosophy around that is the less you look at the outcome or the scoreboard and the more trust in the process where the control is and you can be present, then I think that's the favoured sort of state of mind for us. I think it does come down to the players in the dressing room. You would have to be a bold leader to tell your group of players that don't worry about the outcome. We're not here to win. I think that doesn't happen, particularly with the dressing rooms I've been in or fortunate to be in for a long time now. And you have to feed the animal a little bit. We know exactly what makes people tick in here. But I think it's all about regulated focus and what you can control. The other thing I really liked, and I did read about this, and I hope it's true, is that they had a stuffed kiwi. I'm not too sure this is true or not, in a box.
The mascot, yeah.
Yeah, the mascot, and they were going to give it to the team that beat them first.
Mm-hmm.
And the box was never opened.
That's right.
So I really love that concept, because it just gives you belief, doesn't it? You know, it's just, we're never going to open the box. That's it. You know, that's one thing that we're not going to do. So I thought that was a lovely sort of gesture and a real marker of confidence and belief in terms of what these lads could do. But it's an really interesting concept. But I do like it because, is it brave? Probably not. It's just real. How many teams don't go out there to win? So let's just say that as it is. So I quite like that.
I think I was sort of early in my career. I remember one of the coaches I was working with was really, really allergic to talking about the outcome. He really believed that would put too much pressure and too much weight on the shoulders of the players. So he was trying to be protective. So he would just talk about the process. We'll follow the process, and then we'll trust the process, etc. And I remember one of the senior players coming to me one day and just saying, "Why does he never ever talk about what we're actually trying to do here? Win this competition." He refuses to talk about it, and he said, for me personally, I interpret that as he's actually not confident that we can do it. I may be wrong, but that's what I'm interpreting. And in fact, that wasn't true, but I can understand why he thought that. And he said, secondly, I find it de-energizing. And although he didn't use the word, what he was suggesting was that, you know, dopamine, for example, if you just talk about the process and you never talk about what the goal you're working towards actually is and never define it, then I think what he said was it's de-energizing. And I actually think probably from a hormonal point of view, he was right. Cliff Porter is recovered from injury, but actually while he was injured, not surprising given their social calendar, he put on a little bit of weight. And then when he started playing again, he actually really is not playing anywhere near his normal standard. And moreover, Jim Parker, who had been replacing him, is playing his best rugby of his life. So we get to the Welsh Test match, which is the pinnacle game. And the selection committee on this tour is 3 people: Cliff Porter, vice-captain Jock Richardson, and Stan Dean, who's the manager. And in a vote of 2-1, Stan Dean and Jock Richardson stand down Cliff Porter. This is then announced to the team. They all know that their captain is fit, but he has to front it to them that Jim is playing better than me and he will play against Wales. And he is personally devastated by this and doesn't agree with the decision, although he accepts he's not at his best form, but he doesn't agree that the captain isn't playing the game. As we spoke about in the last episode with Pippa, his mother had written him a letter, and above all, she wished the team harmony. And that was a word he used all of the time. And this is a real pressure moment where his ego would have been, hammered. He was upset and emotional about it, but he did have a value of harmony, which he placed above all of that. And that, I think, this could have easily been a complete derailer for this All Black team, absolutely, if they saw that their leadership was actually splintering. But that didn't happen. So he keeps his head down. And what sort of naturally happens, and you and I have seen this, but we see it every week, don't we, is that in teams, the absolute reality is that power shifts happen every single week. If we define power as the ability of an individual to influence others, it moves every single week. Of course, when a captain is not playing, then their power, their ability to influence people diminishes. And then Jock Richardson's promoted to the captaincy, so his power's influence on others increases. Also, something that happened here around this shift in power dynamics is Mark Nichols, who was this Wellington standoff. He was then appointed the vice-captain. So he was in charge of the backline, and he was a very outspoken, and some would say a quite arrogant type of a guy. And he went from sort of just one of the guys all of a sudden to the vice captain. He was very vocal and was quite confrontational to people and supportive of other people like George Napier. But he wasn't that popular with a lot of players. And in 4 years' time, the All Blacks went to South Africa and he fell out with a lot of the players from this team. Under a different regime, they did splinter apart. So all of a sudden, within a week or so, we've got this shift where the captain's power is diminished somewhat, and these 2 other individuals are now in control effectively of the team, certainly on the field. And I think it's impressive that they were able to navigate that successfully. Again, I use that word. That could have been a complete derailer here. But again, I just love your reflections a little bit on that area.
Yeah, and like you say, it could have, but it didn't cause a breakdown, but instead probably showed that collective adaptability and trust in each other's abilities. It's the classic thing of how individual talent and how people work together well is the collective advantage. And I think that's exactly what we have here. If they didn't have that, then it would have broken for sure. If that wasn't there, and we always talk about this reciprocal trust and his behaviors and actions after the sort of news was delivered, people who would take more out of a system than giving back in breaks cooperation and trust. We know that for a fact. And this guy has remained humble. His dignity is really profound, but he stood tall and he's very selfless in his behavior and his role in the team. And I think that develops with the team over time. And I think that's what we're seeing playing out here.
And, this is an issue which is going to stay with him because he is fully fit by the time of the next international against England. And again, he's not selected and he's voted down. And, in his late in life, there's a bitterness about it. But as we're focusing on here, his harmony, team cohesion was his priority. He wasn't about to undo any of it. He did privately sound out a couple of individuals as to whether, given that he wasn't the on-field captain, whether he should stay as the captain the rest of the time. And Jock Richardson and others said, please, yes, of course. So again, it probably shows his humility, but also it's very important, I think, to note how the teammates he mentioned that to all said, you are our leader, but Jock will lead us on the field. So I think off the field, that was, again, well done by everybody, is that he continued to lead. So there wasn't confusion and grey areas around that. But on the field, obviously, there was different leadership. So the morning of the game against Wales is huge international. The New Zealand Prime Minister sends a telegram. And again, embracing this outcome focus, the manager of the team of the All Blacks reads it out in the dressing room. This message from the Prime Minister, which is extolling them to win this match. They come to St Helens Ground, 55,000 people at St Helens Ground in Swansea, just thinking about that. That's pretty incredible. I've been there myself, trying to imagine 55,000 people there. Just the most amazing atmosphere of their lives, I think, is the way that players describe it. There was a beautiful scene in 1982 when George Napier went back to St Helens because the New Zealand Maoris had a tour to Wales and they played against Swansea there, and he stood in the middle, 1982, as an old man. Got a standing ovation from the Welsh, who remembered exactly who he was, and in that era, just so cool. There were thousands of people who could not get into the ground as well, so 55,000 in the ground, thousands outside weren't allowed entry. The weather had been pretty good, actually, but it just started to drizzle a little bit. And the game itself, and, this is not a podcast about scrums and lineouts. The game itself was slightly tainted by the fact that Jack Weir, who you mentioned before, that war hero and captain of the team, he was injured early in the game, and in those days there was no replacements, and Wales were effectively down to 14 players. Having said that, Wales had come last in this Five Nations the season before. They were not a great team. They were a great team in 1905, and they were a great team in the 1930s, 40s and 50s, but in this era they actually were quite weak. Not that the All Blacks particularly would have recognised that. They were the big ogre, really, that had to be beaten, but it wasn't the strongest of Welsh teams. They played well, they fought hard, and in the end, the All Blacks were ahead 11-0 at halftime and won 19-0. And in the aftermatch, Cliff Porter made a point. I don't know how well it went down. He wasn't trying to be facetious, but he just made a point that 19 points represents a point for every year since 1905, and it fell. and that added some good feeling to it. I think one thing I just want to highlight, though, about the game from a performance point of view is this is, all this internal and external pressure. George Napier's talking about this emotionalism, which they were sort of living in the whole week. The performance anxiety is off the scale. Outcome is everything for this game. But what's really interesting is the All Blacks decided tactically just to attack in this game. And there wasn't, avoidance of mistakes and stay in the fight and be attritional and any of this stuff. George Napier, and there's a quote from him, we decided that the ball was to be thrown about. Our backs, our team attacked again. We did not play for position or penalty kicks. We played to cross the enemy's goal line as often as possible. And, I think that's a lovely thing to hand down from the Invincibles, is when you're faced with that holy grail, to be strong and optimistic and positive, and absolutely unleash yourselves and trust each other to be able to do that. And that was a stunning performance by them in an incredibly challenging environment.
Yeah. I think I was listening to Wayne talking about staying ahead of the curve and, making people come to your level to push you. So, these things, if you are going full out, then that's the way it is. That's the way that you play the game. If you have a real deep belief and assumption about how this game should be played, then I think it's not brave. It's just doing what you should be doing, really. But I do like this thing in terms of, I've been in situations where I've been with teams who are very good counteracting teams, counter-attack teams, sorry. But really good sides have stayed deep against us and given us that respect, but also really made us struggle to implement our game, and because we haven't been adaptive and gone the next thing, we've just stuck and fallen in love with the wins. We go with what has always been successful. It caught us out in the Euro 2016. I'm talking the Welsh team, where we played Portugal and Portugal stayed deep. And so that was really difficult to implement what gave us success. So I think I was listening to Wayne, he was saying, that's a good challenge because we need to go again. We need to think about something completely different. So I'm wondering whether Wales was surprised about that in terms of the game, the way that they managed the game and how aggressive they were, really. I think you're right. They had too much skill and technical ability in the back division by the sounds of things and the match reports that I've read, but it sounds like it was full on and really pushing Wales back, which I'm not too sure they would have coped with that particular team and the results at the time.
And I think what we do, I think the worst feeling we end up with is when in those big games we don't live our identity out. Whatever the scoreboard says, if you live out your identity, if you talk about what your super strengths are, like the Invincibles did, and you get out there and deliver that and unleash that, you can much easier live with the result of even if it goes against you. But when you are inhibited and you don't have the courage or the bravery to really, really stamp that identity onto a game, it's a horrible feeling, and it stays with people for a very, very long time. So I suppose that was part of, again, I would say quite a sophisticated approach to performance, was that, this is the game and we are not going to play a mild version of our identity and lose. It's not going to happen. We're either going to win that way or we'll lose that way.
Or learn that way.
Exactly. Mitch, thank you so much for your time, mate. It's been great to connect on this story and for you to help navigate us through this really critical stage where they played the first two internationals. The Welsh one was, as we've emphasised, just absolutely huge for them, and they managed to successfully get through that. Then we move on to the next part of the tour, which is some more games in England, and then the English Test match itself, which is going to decide their ultimate legacy. So thanks so much. All the very best with the Premier League season, and look forward to keeping in touch.
No, really, really appreciated to be part of this, as always, to work with you and discuss some pretty important stuff. It was a big build-up. I wish Wales had brought something more to the table during the game, but it didn't sound like that was going to happen, unfortunately. So it might have been a different story we're talking about. But what a brilliant piece of work that you've brought to the table, and some fantastic people to talk. I'm just really proud and delighted to be part of this group talking about it, and putting a piece of history together is so exciting. So thanks for that, Diolch yn fawr.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please feel free to follow this podcast and leave a review and any comments that you might have. If some of the core ideas that we explored today resonated with you, you might enjoy diving into my book, Belonging. See you next time.